Greetings, travelers. Welcome in to this little pit stop on your journeys through the Feywild or wherever you may find yourself being. My name is Josh McCune, and I'm enrolled in a class entitled SERP 200 for the fall 2025 semester at the University of Arizona. If you're tuned in to this podcast today, that means you are here to listen to my submission for this course's final project. I am joined here today by my friend and colleague Reid Buffington.
Hello.
And today we've got a pretty fun program of discussion. So we'll just go ahead and get straight into it. So, first of all, Reid, as you're aware, today we're going to be talking a little bit about D&D.
Yes, that we are. That we
So,
are.
As a preface, Reid is not a person who I'm taking this course with. Rather, he's a personal friend of mine. He's actually way across the pond. Well, I suppose I shouldn't say that. That implies that you're over in Europe. But you're a little bit more than a hop, skip, and a jump away from where I'm currently at.
About almost close to a full day's worth of travel, I want to say. It's pretty far away, like 18 or so hours, 15 or so hours.
Yeah, so he's one of my friends back from Illinois, place that I hail from. So him and I, we're a little bit of strictly on the digital space with one another currently, but we have known each other for about 5 years now, I want to say.
Sounds about right. We did meet each other in 8th grade, middle school, but we officially became friends in freshman year. I want to say maybe first or second semester, or obviously first, second semester, but we became friends probably second semester, I want to say, freshman year. I remember very clearly. We were in the auditorium together, and I just asked you, "Hey, do you want to be like friends or something?" And we've been pretty good friends ever since. We connected really well. So
It just kind of worked itself out. But related to our very long friendship, one of the first mutual activities of ours, other than choir, would be Dungeons and Dragons, as a matter of fact.
yes, sir.
So that is it is our topic of discussion here today. So, Dungeons and Dragons, what is it? For those in the room that may not necessarily be informed, we're going to be talking about it here for a minute, so we might as well get a good preface as to what exactly it is that we're discussing. So, Dungeons and Dragons, for those who may not be informed, is what is known as a tabletop role-playing game, often abridged to TTRPG. Dungeons and Dragons is the most prevalent version of a tabletop role-playing game. It's been around since, fact check me on this, the 80s, I want to say, is whenever the first edition came
Late
out.
70s, like around 1975, I believe, was when the first edition came out. But it was the most prevalent of it. If some of you might be familiar with choose your own adventure, that phrase, before games like D&D were popular and kind of started the whole pen and paper RPG format, there were choose your own adventure books, which are of the same caliber, swords and sorcery fantasy novels where you get to choose what your character did by flipping to a certain page. This one puts you more in the stance of like the adventurers. It was heavily inspired by various fantasy media, primarily Lord of the Rings and The Hobbits. But there is a variety of inspiration from all media that culminates in the game of D&D. It's a very vast source for stories to be told.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and so that's what a lot of the appeal is of D&D. So as you can see, it's been around for even longer than I internalized it as. It's been around for 50 some odd years now. But part of the game's almost universal appeal for those who actually get in and get a chance to play it is the fact that, it can just be played with a pen and paper. You don't really need anything more than that. You just need your own creativity and a group of people who are willing to play alongside you. So it's known for being a very open-ended game. You make of it what you can. So that is why D&D has become so popular, and especially as time has continued on, its prevalence has become a lot more universal compared to where it started. Um, so with that, Dungeons and Dragons, a very popular game, gets more popular year over year. Just came out with a new edition. We're in very celebratory times here in the D&D community. But one thing that often is not thought about in the world of Dungeons and Dragons is disability. And so with disability, there's a lot to it. There's a lot more to it than most even think about in the present day. So there's a lot that, in my brief time, I've only been actively around American media that showcases um, disability in novel ways for only about, I want to say, the past couple of months. You know, disability is not something that is particularly on my mind a lot. I not am personally someone who does not identify as disabled. There's a lot I've learned about the disabled community that just hasn't been in my wheelhouse of existence simply from my lack of identification with the disabled community. It's not something that was in my day-to-day life, so I just didn't think about it a lot. But there is a lot of stuff that I have come to learn about the disabled community, and Reid and I actually have discussed this topic in advance of this podcast, but um, we were thinking about how disability exists within the world of D&D, and we got to thinking on it, like really thinking about it, and we really just came to the realization that D&D isn't really a realm where disability gets talked about much at all, as a matter of fact.
It doesn't really come up. If even though the newest edition, the 5.5 is what people call it, E standing for edition, came out last year, 2024. Even in that version, which is a relatively simplified version of it, even in the newest version, even in older editions, which were more complex, which did have very sort of like crunchier systems and mechanics and numbers, most of the time, disabilities weren't thought of they weren't thought about as a feature, honestly, even beyond something like an injury, or it may be in game, even could be seen from a game design element as like a punishment, like, oh, your character messed up a saving throw and got their arm bit off by a mimic, now they're an amputee or something like that. It's not really thought about something beyond that. It's assumed, I feel at least, that your character is able-bodied in all meaning of the word.
Yes, and so in that sense, really, it's the extent historically of disability within this game has really just been as a handicap. So the term handicap is a little bit dated in the disabled community. It's has its origins at it has technically a different meaning. To handicap something is to intentionally adjust it in a way that compensates for other competition, typically. So in D&D, that is the sense of you, as the game master, typically intentionally disable a character as a consequence for some action that they do. So beyond that, really, other than for maybe some flavor choices, like giving a character glasses or other forms of corrective eyewear, prosthetics, just for style points, typically the only practical application of disability is as a handicap. And so with the material that has been covered and shown and discussed upon in SERP, um, there's a lot that is just ingrained in our society, just in as a baseline, as a consequence of how we have framed disability for centuries, even at this point, that just gives everyone a predisposition to think about disability in certain types of ways. And unfortunately, those ways have often been derogatory in nature and this pertains to all forms of disability. Now, common examples of ostracization are through things like physical disabilities. It's very easy to characterize physical disabilities or to characterize someone through their disability, thinking about, physical manifestations of evil, like giving a evil character an eye patch or a prosthetic limb, something like that, giving them a limp even, or giving them some type of speech impediment. Those types of things often make an audience see that character as an other, and that physical difference that is their disability makes it easier for an able-bodied audience to cast that person as another. But unfortunately, it also comes with the consequence of ostracizing people who have physical disabilities, or extending this out, people with any type of disability, thinking about normal people that exist with eye patches, prosthetics, limps, speech impediments, among many others.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect. I mean, an example I can think of right at the top of my head is the last session that I ran, um, where it was using a somewhat negative sense. Is we were fighting like a boss, like our first boss of this campaign that I have on Saturdays, and this boss that me and my party were facing, he had like a metallic arm and like a missing eye or something like that, if I remember correctly. And I wasn't thinking even about it as it possibly being negative, but the character himself, I mean, it wasn't like evil. He was a more like morally gray type character. That's another. This is at the point though, but just thinking about it from there, that's quite interesting to think about that. Um, we also talked about it going in the opposite direction as well, the where the disability is othered, but not othered for being good, is or not othered for being not othered for being bad, but othered for being seen as better. What comes to mind for me is the blind swordsman trope. You've seen a lot of media where you'll have you'll have like the swordsman who wears like a blindfold or otherwise has an eye covering or is completely blind, and the assumption is, oh well, this warrior is blind, so they must be a terrible warrior, and they outclass almost every other sword wielding character who does have sight. Another example that might be a bit more popular is Daredevil as a character, where quite honestly, they never really use the fact that he's blind too much when he is Daredevil. It's because of how they almost like compensate for it. It's just interesting to think about how they portray it, even though it's supposed to be positive. It's also kind of othering them and like putting them on a pedestal, so to speak. I believe we spoke about that at great length.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, what Reid is getting at is that in our media, disability can be portrayed in a lot of ways that are able to be harmful without necessarily being, in the most overt sense, positive, negative, or neutral. So, with that, this is discussing what I'm going to refer to as representational connotation of disability. So this was a big point of discussion in a great deal of the media that I engaged with in my time studying with SERP. Disability being in itself, disability is just a neutral thing. If you have disability, a disability exists in a vacuum. Like, say that there is a person who is blind. We'll just continue with that example. In a vacuum, that person just can't see. And that's the only thing that their blindness impacts, is just their eyes do not work in all of the normal ways you expect the ocular complex to work. That's it. But unfortunately, we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a society with all of our fun little human biases, endeavors, predispositions, and all that fun stuff that you get by having a group of people exist in a common space. So, with everything, including disability, it gets represented with some type of connotation. And that connotation can be negative, it can be positive, or it can be neutral. And that connotation is impacted by the person trying to represent the thing, their own biases and predispositions, as well as their intended goal for what that representation should do. So we're talking very abstract and conceptual here, but follow along with me here for a sec. So the representation, the goal, and the bias aren't necessarily one and the same, and they don't have to be. And so that's where you have situations where something with what would be perceived as a positive representation can still be harmful to a group. Thinking about the blind swordsman. The blind swordsman is what I would consider to be a positive representation of disability, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's positive for disability representation. And why do I say that? Because what the trope of a blind swordsman is showing is that the swordsman can still do the swordsman part of their existence and their identity with the instant that they are blind. And so what that shows is that the blind swordsman is working in spite of something else that is a part of who they are as a person. A blind swordsman can still be a swordsman despite the fact that they are blind. And so media like that has a positive connotation because it shows the swordsman being able to do something, but it's still damaging because that positive representation is still made with the bias that blindness is something that would otherwise prevent you from being able to be a swordsman. And so therefore the swordsman is represented in a way that shows them working in spite of their disability. So it's an interesting thing to think about, and once you start realizing it, it shows that there are a lot of instances where you may think that something is being represented in a way that is good because it is being represented in a way that is positive, but it may not actually be representing the underlying group or problem, cause, anything in a way that seeks to actually improve our collective societal interpretation of that thing. And so with disability, a common term that comes up for that type of connotation that I just described is what's called the inspiration porn. And that's a term that was brought up in many a discussion this past semester where you have that positive connotation to the media that is being created, but it's done in a way that is not genuine to actually improving the lives of the disabled community. Thinking about phrases like, if you see a child with a prosthesis as being involved in a marathon or something like that. And then you have a tagline of, this child can do it, why can't you? Or this child can do it, so can you. Or this person did it, why not you? Those types of phrases. That type of feel-good content is very clearly made for an able-bodied audience and demonstrates a disabled person working in spite of their disability rather than working with their disability or just existing as a person with a given disability. And so that creates more problems than it solves. And it furthers our own internal biases around that disability. So it's a very important thing to consider, especially as we get into fantastical realms like Dungeons and Dragons, where we go beyond even what is just humanly possible. And one of the biggest fun parts about D&D is you get to do superhuman things. But when we think about more novel situations to create, especially as game masters or dungeon masters, Reid and I both work as dungeon masters, by the way. We've had a fair bit of experience at the head of the table making our own stories. But what we have to think about is our representational connotation to the types of situations that we create, and whether or not those representations are truly designed to further the goals of a given group, or whether or not they're working against those goals.
Yep. And it's interesting, if you don't mind me circling back a little bit to what you were saying earlier. Something as you were talking about the inspiration porn, as you put it, it almost to me feels like both the negative and positive, both of them almost feel like they are picking out the disability as if it were something bad, or something that is, I don't know. For me, for the inspiration porn, it's almost like they don't really show much of the like the hardship or the struggle in media, at least, and later on, of course, D&D, where it is again, like I said, it's more so like set dressing, like choosing to have a character have brown hair or black hair, or choosing a character to be a different species, like elf, dwarf, gnome, or something like that. So, but instead of that, it's, oh, my character can't see, but there's never really, like, there's no effects behind it. Going back to my Daredevil example, he's in the universe, the character Daredevil, he is a blind. He is a street level superhero, but he's able to move and beat people up, beat up baddies or criminals or whatever, with extreme like precision and skill, as if he were super trained, but he's also like blind. And it's interesting that some media doesn't really show the disability part of disabilities, almost as if it's like, how some people could internalize it as like, oh well, yeah, almost like dismissing it as if it isn't like really, like, almost, I don't want to say erasure, I don't know if that's the correct term, but that's how it feels to me, if that makes any sense.
For sure.
Yeah.
So then with goodness me, losing my train of thought. With Daredevil and this instance of belittling. So then I'll ask you, do you think that some type of disability that a character has, do you believe that it should be taken one way or the other, whether or not a disability should be particularly accented in the character, or was that what you were trying to get at with examples like Daredevil?
What I think should happen is I think at least it should be, there should be a reason. I don't know if reason is the right word, but it shouldn't just be like set dressing or to make this character seem quote unquote cool. Like and now I say that Daredevil doesn't have it. I will be honest, I haven't really seen much of Daredevil, so I could be completely wrong about that. And any listeners hearing this, and if I am incorrect, I do apologize. But
I haven't seen it either, so
so
guilty as
if
charged
I
with
am
wrong.
incorrect, I do apologize as such. But just thinking again in general terms, but like I think it would be interesting to show the audience and to show people who might be disabled, um, like, because I could imagine myself in a situation where, like, if I saw it portrayed in all of its forms, both positive aspects of it and negative aspects of it, like maybe do show them overcoming it, but do show them like also failing at it. Do show them also it being harder for them, because that can relate to most people's lives with it. I feel, at least, what with living with that disability, because like, it does present its own challenges. Of course, that's sort of what I'm getting at there. Again, going back to the inspiration point, where it's just where it isn't fully shown in all its facets. Like again, like I said, like a more neutral portrayal of it, where it's just a aspect of the character, and it is represented as such. It's neither shown as something inherently bad or inherently good or better than other people, or puts them up on a pedestal. They're just seen as equals with everyone else, just neutral to them. That's what I was sort of getting at.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my apologies. I didn't quite follow that the first time, but that's on me.
No,
So,
you're quite all right.
but that is a good point, because while maybe not necessarily an overcoming should be the goal to show with a disability, what is a great deal in the disabled community and disability activists, what they're trying to change in our collective zeitgeist, in the mindset of your average person on the street who is likely not identifying with any type of disability. What we're trying to change is our thought process around a disability and what it is and what it means to be disabled, to have a disability, to be a person with a disability, to be disabled. As I said earlier, in a vacuum, a disability is just a difference in some type of trait that someone has, that in our society typically makes day-to-day life harder, but that increase in difficulty stems more so from a lack of accessibility and inclusion from that person's non-disabled people that they live in that same society with. So what disabled activists are trying to say is that if you take a disability and you just look at it for what it is, there's nothing inherent to it other than the traits it affects. Disabled people can still do majority the same things as their non-disabled counterparts, or I shouldn't even say counterparts, as their non-disabled society mates. They just have to maybe take a different route to go about doing the same thing. So in the majority of uplifting media around disability, overcoming is absolutely a common trope or theme, and that ties into different mentalities and I guess what we call models of disability representation. So historically speaking, most of the rhetoric around positive impacts for disability has been based around a cure. So in our current world, if you take your average person on the street, I would wager that they would sooner say that they would want to allocate funding towards finding a cure for any given disability rather than allocating funds to make having that disability a more accessible trait to have in our society. Because the majority of our rhetoric around disability is that it's something that where a cure is desirable. It's something that people should want. Thinking to, I forget his name, but he did up until around I think 2016 is when it stopped. His name's Jerry. I just don't remember his last name. But he would do, I think it was the Labor Day weekend. It was this big television event that was hosted every year on, I'm pretty sure it was the Labor Day weekend. I'm looking this up right now. What's his name? Labor Day weekend. But for the longest time, whatever his Jerry Lewis. There we go. Oh my goodness. Jerry Lewis. Okay. So Jerry Lewis, he did the Labor Day telethon, is what it was called. And he got a lot of funding from it. A lot of people would call in and make donations to it. And the goal was with the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And so what Jerry did through this telethon is he would raise money for the Muscular Dystrophy Association to try and cure muscular dystrophy. That's where the majority of the funding went. And so, was a lot of good work getting done? Yes. Was the funding great? Yes. It was sourced from the public. It was sourced from people who genuinely did care about muscular dystrophy. But the way that that entire show was framed was controversial, especially for people in the disabled community, because the telethon focused on finding a cure. And so a lot of people who were featured on the show who had muscular dystrophy were referred to as Jerry's kids. They were portrayed in a way that was very belittling to them. So it was a positive representation with that societal bias that a disabled person is not able to experience the same quality of life as a non-disabled person. So we should you should donate your money now if you're on this Labor Day to help the Muscular Dystrophy Association seek to cure this condition so that way those who are afflicted with it, and it was children that were shown on the show, by the way. They were called Jerry's Kids. That was the group of people I was referring to. So Jerry's Kids were the people who were children at the time of being shown on live television with muscular dystrophy, giving their stories and details and all that on television for to pull at the heartstrings of the masses to give their money to the Muscular Dystrophy Association. So with representation like that from the likes of Jerry Lewis, oh, I forgot where I was trailing from this. With muscular dystrophy, oh my gosh, what was I saying 5 seconds ago?
You were just, I believe, you're talking about how the disabled community kind of took the Jerry's Kids, all that whole program as being a tad bit insensitive because of them portraying them as like sick kids, basically, that needed to have a cure done.
Oh yes, that's right, cure-based mentality. Goodness me, it's past my bedtime
You're
now. We're recording this a bit later than we thought we would. That's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, a
Well,
cure-based mentality. So what the show was indicating was that, a quality of life was not attainable for people with muscular dystrophy, so the money had to go towards finding a cure. And with that, most often people will think about disability as something that needs to be cured because the world we live in just simply is not built with disability in mind, which that is correct. But there's also that other thought that, well, we really can't build a world with disability in mind because to have a disability is to lack an ability. So therefore, someone who has a disability fundamentally cannot have the same quality of life as someone who is traditionally able. But that is a fundamentally flawed way of thought because all of the discrimination around disability, that general concept, is ableism. That is what ableism is. If you are to go and act in a way that reaffirms bias around societal conventions of normal ability, that is ableism. But again, thinking back to the idea that disability in a vacuum is a neutral thing, who's to say that there isn't an alternate universe where humans were born with, let's say, one eye? We are monocular creatures. And depth perception is something we don't have. But let's say that that was the norm. And every single human being was born with one eye, no sense of depth perception. To that society, people having depth perception is not something that we would contend with because nobody would have it unless you were to be born with two eyes. But a lack of depth perception would not be considered a disability in this community because everyone has it, or the majority of people have one eye. And it's entirely arbitrary. Does this world exist? No, the real world isn't like that. But it goes to show how arbitrary ableism as a concept is, because when we think in ableistic ways, we are trying to other someone for having a set of traits that differs from what our expectation is of what a normal set of traits and abilities is in a person. And therefore, when we go through our day-to-day lives, if we have all of those traits and abilities, then we can exist just fine. And then we don't really think about how we can make our spaces and society as inclusive to everyone. And while that may seem, at first glance, normal, because it's, again, societal convention that upholds this idea around ableism, unfortunately for all my ableists in the audience, that is an arbitrary way of thought, and there is nothing truly inherent to the traits and abilities that we as a species have. So to seek a cure, thinking to the likes of Jerry Lewis and others who prioritize a cure-based mentality, they've actually got it backwards, because while I'm sure it would be great if we could have cures for every single ailment and disability and disease on planet Earth, unfortunately that would take a lot of time, research, and may not even be physically possible for some disabilities. Who's to say? Something that is a lot more straightforward of an approach is to just make our current world accessible to everyone. Because that, for sure, you can do. And if it's accessible to everyone, then everyone can at least live and have the same expectation for quality of life. And then and only then can you really prioritize finding cures for a given condition or disability. But even then, you shouldn't have any expectation that a disabled person would want that. Again, disability is neutral. So in an ideal world, if everything is accessible, then we might have a proportion of our population that exists with their disability and may not even want to have it be quote-unquote cured,
You bring up how resource consuming it would be to prioritize cures and how it might even be impossible. But circling back into the topic of TTRPGs and D&D, what if it were? What if it was viable and possible and even easy at times to cure a disability?
Yes.
And I think that's interesting, and that's probably honestly partially why TTRPGs and D&D don't have many disability or mechanics like that beyond just a temporary punishment, or mechanically speaking, at least, not like like lore wise, but like
Right.
it is a result of taking much damage or failing a saving throw or whatever. That isn't like an injury that can be later healed, because it's a fantasy game and it's a very high fantasy game, which means that magic is very prevalent and there are plenty of spells that can regenerate limbs, that can bring you back from the dead completely, that can reincarnate you, so you can change up your species. And there's even weaker spells that in a world that you build, that you could assume that most people have access to. You could assume that these spells would be readily available, and even for not as visible disabilities as like a missing limb, so something like, I don't know, like maybe like you said, muscular dystrophy, I believe is what you called it, or something like an arthritis type situation, or nerve damage, or something along those lines. You could easily foresee those being very easily and possible to be cured. So I think that's a part of the reason why I think it's not really shown beyond just oh, this is a negative status effect that is impeding my character, I have to get it fixed, or else my experience will be worse, or will be harder, or whatever.
Yeah, and that is
And that feels like
we
a
haven't
very able-bodied perspective to me. That's what it feels like.
indeed. Yeah, and so we have been taking a great deal of time to talk about the real world. Why don't we talk about the fantasy realm, of course? So you're exactly right. They're with the world of D&D and high fantasy, they are able to do things that are superhuman to the real and natural world. So, while here in the real world, the importance of not emphasizing the cure-based mentality compared to the quality of life improvement-based mentality, I guess in a sense is what that would be called, is palpable because our resources are limited in the world of D&D. Things work a little bit differently. It's a lot easier to get a cure for a lot more um, intense of bodily adjustments. So, we've had many a situation where Reid and I at the table have been beaten within an inch of our lives. Our characters have made it out with, for what for us is a numbers game. It's just generally a hit point or two, but for our characters, that's supposed to represent some pretty severe body damage. And I mean, in D&D, you can sleep it off entirely. You're
You
without
can.
hit
You can,
points.
absolutely can.
Anything can be
Eight
slept
hours
off.
of rest. Yeah, 8 hours of rest can return your character, who I believe in my last session, in that same boss fight, one of the enemy combatants like did all of my more than all of my HP in one attack, and it was described as my body getting like cut open. Basically, I won't go into too much detail, of course, but it was really funny to know that once I take a long rest, all of my hit points will be restored, and the only thing I have to show for that would be like maybe some scars on my body, and it's quite interesting to me.
Right. And then that's entirely up to player choice, no less. So it's with
Yes,
D&D, as long as you can crawl your mangled almost corpse into a bed and fall asleep, then you're fine. So even from a mechanics standpoint, D&D is a lot more forgiving to physical disability compared to the real world. So that does then raise the maybe the question or the concern of, well, in the world of D&D, where things are a lot more curable than they are here in the real world, then what is the general mindset towards physical disability in a world that has what maybe would be considered arcane medicine compared to what is possible here in the real world? Because in the world of D&D, almost everyone knows how to cast even a rudimentary healing spell. It doesn't take a lot of expertise to know how to do it.
correct. And if your character, for whatever reason, can't, there are plenty of magic item stores or potion stores where you can buy a potion of healing or a scroll that casts a healing spell.
Exactly. So then, when we think about instances where a physical disability, especially, has been maintained by a character, the question becomes: in D&D, if you exist with a physical disability, it really does seem like it's by choice rather than as a consequence of just your existence. Because I would wager that it would be a lot more believable in the realm of high fantasy if, say, you're blind. I think it would make a lot of sense for someone to be able to go somewhere to cure their blindness rather than get corrective eyewear. And so then if a person were to choose to get corrective eyewear instead, then that's more of a style choice than anything else. So it does create a little bit of a disconnect then between us players in the real world and our characters because I'm, I'm intentionally saying physical disability because I believe that when we talk about disability, it encompasses two realms, really the realm of physical disability and the realm of mental disability. And with mental disability, especially, I want to make no claims that a mental disability is a disease of any type, or it's something that inhibits the mind. With the human brain, as complex of an organ as it is, to have a mental disability is really just to have a different brain wiring, in a sense. So in the realm of D&D, I think it would be a lot more believable that a mental disability is just a way of being for a character, and it's not necessarily something that you can go to the apothecary to get a potion for, because then that would make some type of implication that there's a specific thing wrong with the brain that an herb can fix,
Right.
So, with physical disability, anyways, I do believe that that is a big part of the reason why disability really goes not talked about a lot in D&D, is just because in D&D, if you exist with a physical disability, it really is probably by choice.
Yes. And you brought up blinded. Blinded is a condition in the game. It is a status effect you can receive. Usually, like most commonly, is if you're a character who can't see in the dark and you're in a dark area, you have the blinded condition. Or if you're in a heavily obscured area, you have the blinded condition. Or there are certain spells that can blind you as well. But usually there's a spell. It's relatively low level. It's second level, I believe, called Lesser Restoration. It can restore one status effect, and I believe Blinded is on that list of conditions. One that I know is definitely on there is the Paralyzed condition. So if you were playing, I don't know, maybe a character who, for some reason or another, is, well, wheelchair bound, not ambulatory, is paralyzed in some way, well, you can just go to a local church or monastery, pay the gold to either have it performed on you or buy the scroll for it, and you're no longer paralyzed. You can stand up and move as you please.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. Yeah, like I'm agreeing with you here. It is definitely a matter of choice and flavoring for your character.
Right, and so then it's just a fundamentally different way of thinking. So whenever you and I first had this conversation about,
Yes.
what it means to exist with disability, to include disability as an element of existence at the table, in D&D, for physical disability, it's a lot more of a style choice. But then we
Correct.
even talked about more generally what it even means to be disabled, or what would be considered a disability in the world of D&D, because D&D, for better or for worse, for this conversation anyways, isn't just limited to humans. In fact, we have a lot more different body types to deal with than just the human body.
Yep. On a more basic scale, elves are pretty much just humans with pointed ears and a couple of different biological traits. Then the more extreme ends of that, I would say, would be the more diminutive, smaller species. So that would be gnomes, halflings. If any of you know Lord of the Rings, halflings are D&D standing for hobbits or dwarves. But all of them typically max out at around the 5 foot area, and most of them tend to average around like the low 4 foot, 3 foot area. But then if you go up into the more, for lack of a better term, exotic species, you have Dragonborn, which are basically humanoid dragons, essentially, or Aarakocra, which are bird folk, Aasimar, which are basically humans with wings, or Tieflings, which are demon-looking, although they're not like evil or anything. They just have red, blue, purple, pinkish skin, horns, and a tail, typically. Um, so it's interesting, like how, like what would you consider per species? What would like for obviously, some of them are pretty easy to say, like Aarakocra, any of the ones who have extra appendages, like Aarakocra, Aasimar. Um, like a disability for them and easy one to do was like, oh, I have like maybe a wing, like a I don't know, maybe a wing that didn't develop properly, and so my wings are much smaller compared to my body mass, so I have a harder time flying. Or maybe I have weakness in the muscles of my wings, so I can't flap them, but I can hold them out and glide with them, for example. Um, or Aarakocra are more bird related, so maybe something with the feather health, for example. I'm not too much sure about bird anatomy, but that's an example of what do you consider like a lot of of course, all of our disabilities are from the human perspective, but there are, like, like Jeff said, variety of species.
It's more than just humans. So, with all of these different species that exist and their own individual quirks, I mean, we play them all for a variety of reasons. I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many characters of different species I've played. I mean, I primarily deal with just the humanoids, humans, elves, and cats. Um, but it's just there's a ginormous existence of different species out there, and then even into the homebrew space. I mean, canonical D&D has a couple, it has a fair few, but once you start letting people make their own, anything can be a species. And again, that ties back into the beauty and the open-endedness of the game. But with the inclusion of all these different species in a world where what is the line between what is curable and what is not, you really have to think about what necessarily even could be considered a disability in D&D. And so, with that choice to have your character be disabled, I think that brings us to what is perhaps the most touchy part about disability at the table, and that would be the at the table part. Because D&D and the worlds existing within its multiverse, the only claim that I'll make is that magic exists in D&D, so physical disabilities are probably more so an element of choice, according to characters, rather than something that they have to live with. And so that's fine. Thinking about what I was saying earlier, once you get a society to a point where the quality of life of every individual can be the same, whether or not they have a given disability or not, then it more so becomes an element of choice once you start thinking about cures. So that's where D&D is really at in its worlds. And I don't think that's I would say that's rather milquetoast claim about the D&D world. I mean, I've got a fellow dungeon master here with me. I would say that it's probably pretty tame to say that physical disabilities are a choice in the world of D&D.
Absolutely. There's, like I said, there are no mechanics around. There are no rules around a disabled character. You it it I whenever I build a character, I never have to, I don't know, roll on a table to see does my character have a disability or not. No, all it is all a choice. I choose what species I want to play. I want to choose what class I want to play. I choose the background of my character. I make the backstory for him. It is all by my choice. And if I want to, even on a smaller scale, if I want to give a character glasses, that's just they just have glasses. Like, very few DMs, I feel, will have a Scooby-Doo moment where my character's glasses gets knocked off and I'm given disadvantage on perception checks or something like that because my glasses are off. They don't really. It's just set dressing. They just wear glasses. It's never really used beyond just aesthetics, I would say.
Mm-hmm. So then, what I had said just earlier was that disability is something that just isn't really spoken about a lot in D&D, And so while that does absolutely ring true within the media that we create and the stories that we tell, we just really, if we choose to include a disability, it's just set dressing, as you say. But at the table, we as players, we do exist in our world without magic, where disability is not a choice. It's something that is a part of your person or it isn't. And that's just how things are. So for us, I would actually argue that one of the more important ways to consider disability with our TTRPGs is how we approach that dynamic of playing with disabled players, as well as how we want to approach disability with us as DMs into our world building and game design. Because that's where the player characters exist, the player part of the player character, where disability is something that we can't control, because we're existing in the real world with our biases and our disabilities. So thinking to the table dynamic, I think I posed a good question to you. So let's get this conversation going. So you've DM'd for many a group before.
Yes.
So let's say that a player approaches you with a suggestion for a character, and they say, this character has a disability that I want to be more than just flavor. I want it to actually be realized in my character's perception, dynamics, the whole 9 yards. This character is disabled in this manner, and I want it to be a thing at the table. What do you say to that player?
Well, I would probably speak one-on-one with the player. A part of me is saying I would want to ask why, and honestly, I just want to hear whatever the reason is. I don't really, just curiosity, honestly, as to why they might want it.
Right, and that really is like, it's the first question that we posed as a response. Like, it's the go-to, because one of the things that I have learned in taking this class has been that disability is just a thing. It doesn't really hold any connotations by itself, but unfortunately we exist with our bias. So if someone goes up to you as a DM and they're like, hey, I want to play a disabled character, unfortunately it is natural for us to want to assume, well, why would you want to do that? Because it's D&D, right? It's, why would you want to play a character that has something that does not reflect our traditional views of just a normally abled individual? So it really is a fair question. It's like, well, why do you want to do that? I mean, it's probably the first question I would ask too. It's like, well, why do you want to do that?
But and honestly, regardless of the answer, if the player really wants to do it, I don't think I would say no to it. I will be honest, I would be a little confused because, again, as much as the story aspect of it is very important, it is also a game. So it's like, and most of the time, at least for me, most players tend to want to play their character with as few I'll go ahead and use the term handicap. I can't think of anything else. As few sort of things to hold their characters back. They want to play them like as optimally as possible. So the decision for a player to want a disability beyond just, oh, my character wears an eye patch. So like, no, I want my character to, I don't know, maybe whenever they make perception rolls, maybe not disadvantage per se, but maybe just a flat -2 to their rolls because they're missing depth perception, and maybe I reduce the range on their like the effective range on their weaponries that they use, like ranged weapons like a bow for example, because they lack that depth perception. I would be I would be a little confused because again that the mindset that most players have and as a DM have, like, oh, most players want to play their characters to be optimal, but the player really does want it, and for like perhaps it makes sense for them as a story, perhaps they can relate to it on some level. The reason can be whatever the player decides, of course, but I honestly I would let them all give it a shot, and I think I would also let the table know. I would let every other, let's say I'm playing with a group of 4 total, the one player who wishes to play a disabled character and 3 other people, I would get the 3 other people in, and all 5 of us totaled up would discuss it. And as long as, honestly, my ruling, my vibe is, as long as the entire table is okay with the decision, I honestly have no problem rolling with it. We'll play it out for a bit, and maybe down the line, if the player is like, oh, actually, I really kind of, it was, it was, it was, maybe they weren't vibing with the -2. I don't have an issue with just removing it, or maybe in game removing it, or whatever. I play it by ear basically.
For sure. Yeah, and so, with those instances you gave, it's pretty easy from, I would say, a numbers standpoint at the very least, to come up with adjustments for physical disabilities. But then we had the added layer of complexity. Say all this rings true, but your player approaches you and they want to play a character who is mentally disabled. Because I think the general
I
philosophy is good, and I agree. I think that it's one of those things where it's a game and everyone is designed, everyone should have a good time. That's why we go to the table and why we take all the time to fill out numbers and make character sheets and all that. The goal is to have fun. But part of that is allowing people to realize characters to their fullest potential. And there may be some player out there that, say, maybe has a given mental disability and they want their character to have that be realized as well. And so, um, where was I going with this? For a mental disability, it's a lot more intimate of a thing to do compared to a physical disability. Because, I mean, again, I don't personally identify as disabled in any capacity. I I don't know. If a player were to ask me to realize that, I think I would really have to. I don't know if I would even be equipped as a DM to properly do that approach. But then it's like, we as DMs, we have the responsibility for maintaining our table dynamics. So it's even like, it feels like it's a failing on my part as a dungeon master because I'm the one who makes the game. This really does seem like something where it should be so simple. It's just represent a character with a given trait. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's a very individualized thing. It affects everyone differently. And so it's like, do we even, in our society that we as DMs exist in, have the proper approach to being able to represent a character with a given disability, a given mental disability, especially, truthfully? And should we even do that as DMs if we don't have that disability? Now, of course,
I
that
think
dynamic is a little bit differently for player characters because the player is playing their character, but for us DMs, we do still have the responsibility to, in good faith, create an environment where that player character can exist, you know?
and I think what the DM should do, in my opinion. I think they should at least give it a try, because you mentioned how it's the DM's responsibility, but also the DM doesn't have to run the game that everyone else wants to run. The DM can also choose to run whatever game they wish to run.
Hmm.
So I definitely agree that they should definitely give it a shot, but sometimes it might not work out. Maybe at that point, maybe that player can go to a different DM who can help them, or find a community where they can search for a game that allows them to play that character in a certain way, or something similar to that. I agree that the DM should try, but I also think it's okay if the DM can't fully realize it or doesn't feel like they have the ability to realize it fully. And when I say they should at least try, what I mean by that is I think the DM and the player should talk one on one about it. I think they should discuss the nature of the disability, if perhaps if the mental disability, if the DM isn't aware of the mental disability, and like, because the thing about mental disabilities, from what I understand, is that it is not a one size fits all. It is a wide variety of symptoms, or not symptoms per se, but affects. It affects people differently, and the mind itself is a very complex thing. So I think asking your player specifically, well, how do you want this mental disability realized, and asking them that might be able to help you better realize it.
Hmm.
So that I would throw that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. But then that is the big thing here is it's what does accessibility and inclusion look like in D&D? Because that was the big point we had here is
Yes.
obviously as humans, we want to be accessible in all the things that we do. And I fancy myself the creative type, been known to do a thing or two in the art community. And so as an
Mm-hmm.
artist, especially thinking about my bias and my predispositions in the society that I live in, and especially as an artist who doesn't identify as disabled, I th- I think a lot about the product that I make, that I'm able to make, the things I'm able to represent truthfully, genuinely.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that I agree with the assertions from many members of the disabled community. Uh, what was his name? I think his name was Elliot something. I'm gonna look this up real quick. His name, he's a he wrote an article about uh, disability in Hollywood, and one of the points that he makes, I was quite a fan of. He his argument was that in Hollywood, and then more generally in the world of art, non-disabled actors cannot truthfully represent disability. And so he argues that in Hollywood, if a disability is called for on a character sheet, then you ought to get an actor that has that disability. Just makes the most sense. His name is Dominic Evans. I just found his article. The article I'm quoting here is Non-Disabled Hollywood Continues to Profit Off Disability Without Us. It's posted on the Center for Disability Rights' website. But it's an amazing article. He is very straightforward with his opinion and approach to it. But opinions like his, I absolutely agree with. I believe that if you do not have a disability, you cannot truthfully represent it as well as someone with that disability could, because it's not your lived experience. I have never lived with, say, cerebral palsy. I would never in a million years take an acting gig where I have to represent a character with cerebral palsy. I am an okay actor on a good day. The last thing I need is to try and portray something that is not truthful to me. But on the opposite side of that coin, I'm an artist. And I think that artists should have the capacity to maybe not portray a given disability, but maybe rather to represent it in a way that is informed, you know? So it is a really interesting line that I walk as an artist. And Reid, you're an artist too, so weigh in on this how you see fit. But my general philosophy is
Mhm.
that I should be able to make whatever product is called of me. And then it's my call to decide whether or not the product in the first place is worth making or should be made. But with D&D, I don't think accessibility and inclusion looks like a DM including NPCs with given disabilities just for the sake of it, or even maybe at all, unless that DM has that disability and knows how to represent it, or portray it, I should say. So that is the question,
Yeah. Go ahead,
is
finish.
is there a good reason for, and with physical disability, I think there's just a fundamental divide here with D&D, because while it was mentioned a lot about characterizing characters with disability, I'm going to go with the assumption that a DM who is having the same thought process as us at this point can understand that they shouldn't do that and that a disability is just a thing. It's not something that should be used to represent some other trait.
Right.
So, with mental
Yes.
disability, then the question is, do we have the capacity to represent a character with a mental disability truthfully? And then if we do, should we use it if we don't have that disability? Like, what is the reason to do so? And I would argue that no, I don't think we should.
Have to say I agree because unfortunately with mental disabilities, a lot of them are
Like you said, on spectrum,
um, yeah on spectrum, yes. I was referring specifically to
they're very dynamic.
in media. In media, they're misrepresented. They're exaggerated in some way, or they're just not shown in good faith. And I would, and yes, and saying agreeing with you, yes, it is also because they are also dynamic, and it is. I would hate for my representation of a mental disability to be seen as bad faith because of like lack of like experience or just a poor representation of it. So I don't really think I have the ability to do that. I don't in a way that is a good faith in a truthful representation of it. That's how I feel
Yeah, and I would.
because of how complex they are.
hmm So then, on the contrary, then the question is, well, why would you even do that in the first place? Why is this question even being raised at all? So in media, as you said, actually you hit the nail on the head there. Mental disability, especially, is often misrepresented. So many people, typically traditionally able-bodied people, would argue that the best way to solve the bias in our media and misrepresentation of disability is to just not represent it at all. Just don't worry about it. Just remove the disability in the first place, and then you don't have any disability to misrepresent. But unfortunately, that's censorship, and that's
Yes.
removing something just to make something more palatable. And that is a whole separate topic that I have many more general opinions about. But as it pertains to disability, what is the goal with disability representation in media is to actively represent disability, but just to do it in a way that doesn't further disability stereotype. We should still absolutely be including disabled characters in our media because disability is a part of human life. It's a part of the human experience. So to remove it is to falsely portray the human experience, and then you're contributing to that bias. So there is a need for active inclusion and representation of disability in our characters and stories. And I would say that that does absolutely include D&D. D&D does need disabled characters because it's a factor of the human experience. But what I'm saying here is that that active representation is needed, but I think we should take a similar approach to Dominic in his article, where what accessibility and inclusion looks like, well, not accessibility, just inclusion. What inclusion for the disabled community looks like here at the D&D table is I would want to see disabled creators in the D&D space make characters, style guides, references, materials, things like that for us other DMs to use for the tellings of our stories or to tell their own stories. That's what I would love to see is because first of all, you're physically getting disabled D&D players involved for utilizing their media, their stories, their content, their product, as I say. So that's the real world part of it. But then also in the stories that are being made, those types of characters are being represented in a way that's truthful in the ways that disabled people like Dominic say are the best way to do so, to which I fully agree. So then I think you get the best of both worlds here, where we're not contributing to disability censorship in a way, furthering that stereotype that disability is something you shouldn't talk about. We're not doing that because we're including disability in our stories, but we're also not engaging in furthering disability stereotype because we are allowing those who are disabled amongst us to tell that story because that is equity right there, is
Yes.
allowing the people with the experience to do so.
I actually really like that idea. Maybe I don't know. Maybe if we have any, I don't know if a call to action is really is. I don't know. I if there's anyone out there who like small disabled community or maybe not small, maybe large. I don't know. Once that, maybe get on that if you wish. I think that would be really neat to see. That would definitely be a neat module. I would definitely would check out.
Right? Or a unique approach to making characters. And that's just the thing, is like we don't even have any material to do this approach in the first place, because we just
Right.
the default assumption amongst D&D players is, well, why would you want to do that? But
Yes.
it's media that we create every single time we play this game, so why not? I actually argue that it's very important for us to be able to do that because that's how you include a group is by being able to share their stories in your own. It contributes to that societal homogeneity of our stories. So it's a very important thing for us to do, and I think that that is how inclusion truly gets brought to D&D. So I would love to see it, and I can't really think of any examples off the top of my head of, you know, the disabled creators in this space, let alone ones that are actively bringing disability into the D&D space. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm sure they're out there. They're just Well, this is the internet age. Everything exists. But the fact that I can't name it off the top of my head, and I've been playing this game for almost half a decade, I think it's about time. That time has arrived.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
that's the inclusion element of it, and then for accessibility, I think that's really where the mechanics standpoint of it comes in, where as game makers, dungeon masters, where we are at our most accessible is by just allowing players to come to us with the characters that they want to play, no matter what disability that character or player or both may have. I just think it is the responsibility of the dungeon master to give their best good faith effort to represent that character truthfully.
Agreed. And I also think the other players um, should be made aware of it and should do their best to also um, try and I don't want to say like work with or live with, but just play with, just be around, like, like get everyone on board on the same idea. Session zero talk, essentially. Just cover that before the game starts. Make sure everyone's on the same page. That way, play can go smoothly. That goes for anything in 5e. That's one of the most. If you go online and you look for top 5 DM tips, that's like tip number one. Run a session zero. Get all
Yeah,
the above table talk out of the way for what you want the game to be, how you want it to run, and you reach a consensus that everyone is has a better chance of having fun at the table.
yeah, absolutely. So then, I think honestly, that would be the good parting question for this is to all my people out here who have thought alongside us, who have listened in today. Say you go to the table next time and you're the new group, and someone in that group says that they have a character that they spoke with their DM about that they want to have be realized. What would you change? What would you need to change? What would you want to change? About yourself? About the table dynamics? What would your new approach be to playing with a disabled character? Would you have to do anything consciously about it in order to find success? You may not. You may change a lot. But if at the very least you're thinking about this, that equips you as a player or even as another DM to have a more informed and genuine approach to taking the very important task that we didn't even think that we had here just as game players to bring accessibility and inclusion for the disabled community into our space of D&D. So just put a little bit of thought into it. Think about what you may or may not have to do differently. And as long as you're thinking about it at the very least, that means that you're informed, you're thinking about your bias, and you're thinking about what, if anything, needs to be changed about your approach to this game in order to make it more inclusive and accessible to everyone. And of course, that is the simple goal of the disabled community, is just to bring accessibility and inclusion to all pursuits. And it is our shared responsibility with a game as wild, insane, and varied and open-ended as D&D. It should be a walk in the park for us to include something as fickle as human disability into it. I argue it's a really
Mhm.
simple task. It just takes a little bit of thought at the front.
And again, like I mentioned before, there's nothing wrong with asking the player in question who wishes to play a disabled character the nature of it, because they might educate you on something. You might learn something new about a disability and how it works, or you may find out yourself later. And D&D is a very social game. I'm sure that just the simple act of talking about it with someone else and hearing, but if they are the one who has a disability and they want their character to have it as well, for example, I can imagine that would be very enriching and fulfilling, and possibly building even a new connection or friendship with this person, if you find out about like, well, just that exchange of information, that is a very human thing. It's a very social thing, a very good thing, I feel.
Absolutely. I mean, I fancied myself to be the person to be relatively knowledgeable about most things, including disability, and then, well, I took SERP 200 and I realized just how little I knew about disability. And, it's a very freeing experience knowing more about something. So just ask.
It's,
It will never hurt to learn a thing or two. So, thank you all for listening in. Again, my name is Josh, and I'm here with my colleague Reid. Hopefully, you'll be joining us
Hi.
here. Hopefully, you'll be joining us here soon for our second episode. We are here today to talk about just the concepts behind what it means to have disability representation within D&D. And in our next episode, we'll hopefully be doing a hands-on application where we'll be designing characters with disability, bringing that dynamic to a table environment, and then giving a practical application by showing our characters that we create in action. So, if that sounds interesting to you, you may absolutely go and check out our next episode here very soon.
Yes. Bye bye. Thank you for listening.